Welcome everybody to this edition of Attention Talk Video. I'm your host, ADHD and Attention Coach Jeff Copper, and we're here today with marriage consultant Melissa Orloff. Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
You have a new book out right now that talks about hurtful fights. Can you tell us just a little bit about the book and then what you discuss in terms of hurtful fights in the book?
Yes, of course. So the book is The Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD. And it is all about the emotional hotspots that couples run into, and hurtful fights is clearly one of those. There are too many of those in many of these relationships as they're struggling. And so I talk in the book about the concept of how to have good fights. So the idea isn't not to fight, because that would be completely unnatural. If you're different from each other, you will occasionally disagree. The concept is to fight good fights and repair well from those fights.
What constitutes a good fight?
So a good fight is a fight where it has certain characteristics. A lot of this information comes out of John Gottman's research. He's done a lot of look at what kinds of interactions healthy couples have. And so there are certain things that you can do to make sure that your fight will be as productive as possible, or disagreement, or constructive conversation, if you want to call it that. So, for example, starting with a complaint rather than with a criticism. So, if you have something where you're saying, you never take out the trash, that's a criticism. That's a personal attack, essentially, and the person receives that and gets on the defensive. Whereas if you say, the trash I'd love to have you take out the trash, or you need to take out the trash, or is there a problem with taking out the trash, or something like that, that's more of a complaint.
Okay. That makes some sense. A criticism is more tactful, if you will, and a complaint's more of a statement, I imagine.
Yes,
okay.
Exactly.
Some other characteristics?
Yes, exactly. I will be happy to talk about those. So then there's something called a soft start. So when you ease into a conversation and get someone's attention first, that is very helpful. So you don't just suddenly drop something on them, but you say, well, today I was thinking about XYZ, whatever it is, and I was wondering if we could talk about that, for example.
Okay.
That's a soft start. That sort of invites somebody in. It tells them that you have something on your mind before you just get into it. That's very useful.
What I like about that is you're actually kind of going into it, and maybe the person's not in the frame of mind at that point in time. They wouldn't mind having the conversation, but if they're not there, you're throwing gasoline on the fire. So I kind of really like that one.
Yeah. Well, and also, quite frankly, if you're talking to someone who has ADHD, they may be doing something else.
Yep.
Anybody might be, but particularly easy for somebody with ADHD to be distracted from you, and so you sort of have to get their attention. In fact, one of the things I talk to my couples about is making sure you have eye contact with your partner who has ADHD before you start in on a topic that is of importance to you, because you're much more likely to communicate well when you have their eye contact.
I never thought about that. That makes sense, though.
Yeah, otherwise, I learned this over the years in my own household. If my husband is doing email and I'm trying to say something to him, I've got about 25% of his attention. So, it doesn't work very well. So respect, even if you have something that's difficult to say, respectful conversation is still really important, and definitely a part of good fights, for example. Using non-threatening words. I sadly see too much sort of bullying and threats, and if you say something terrible, maybe we shouldn't be together, and those kinds of things. And obviously those are very difficult to take if you're on the receiving end of them, and they're usually not part of a good fight. And then there are things like demonstrating that you're on the same team. So clarifying phrases. So what you mean is XYZ, or so even though we're disagreeing, I think that what we have in common is XYZ, whatever it is.
I really like that. In coaching, we do a lot of mirroring. It's been fascinating to me when I'm working with somebody with ADD, and this isn't everybody, but every once in a while somebody will say something. I'll write down the phrase that they said, and I'll say, so you said, and repeat what they said word for word. And it's interesting, they'll go, I didn't say that. it fascinates me, and they'll reprocess it in a different way. And because it's interesting, because sometimes I think their intent is one way, but when they hear it back, it's not there. And so if you're kind of mirroring back and hearing what I'm saying, you're actually gaining some clarity. But sometimes those with ADD, I can imagine their brain is going real fast, and they might not get it out the right way. So it brings clarification to what's going on, so that you're on the same page. So that one I really like.
Yeah, and interestingly also, and this is the topic for a different video, but I teach couples to do learning conversations. Yep. And there's also not only the exact words, but there's usually a subcontext somewhere, which is communicating loudly and clearly to a partner of long standing in particular. You're not always aware of those subcontexts.
That learning conversation, we actually have done a video on that that's already been released on YouTube. So if you're interested in that, just go to YouTube, Attention Talk Video, and Melissa Orlov, and her videos will come up. And for our viewers, if you want to check that out, go check it out. It was a great interview. So I think we got time. You got one last tip we can share before we wrap it up?
Well, so the last part of it is learning how to repair. So you have a good fight, but sometimes you still hurt each other. And then there are ways to repair from that. And it's not only offering the apology or the soft words or the way to repair. There are lots of different ways. But also for the other partner being willing to be open to accepting that, what they call bid for repair. And that's an important part of good fights as well.
Sounds good. Well, Melissa, this has been very helpful. I really like a lot of the tips that you provided, and I like the notion that there are kind of good fights, because I do think so often we just fight all the time, but I think that's part of a healthy part of the relationship, because if you guys are the same, it wouldn't work out in part of negotiation. So for our viewers out there, go check out Melissa's book. They can get that off your website, right?
Yes, they can. And actually, you can get 2 free chapters of the Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD on the website, which is at ADHDmarriage.com.
All right. Melissa, thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure.
Take care, everybody.